Welcome. Yesterday was a hot day. It was 105 degrees as I watched people head to the golf course and up the mountain. But it's my hope that at the end of this day, you're going to say that this agenda and this program is just as hot, because I want you to be the guiding coalition to start to transform supply chains. Now, we've set up the program to be a little different this year, and we've arranged you with tables, and we've crafted this so that we can facilitate networking. Our goal is that you'll leave this conference with a much clearer understanding of Supply Chain 2025 and how we win in the race for Supply Chain 2025. So the program is really focused on new business models, reflecting back on where we've been, and also thinking about the supply chain that could be. As we move, we will have a visual facilitator on this side of the room. Please take time to watch it. This will become your artifact of what it will be. And together we'll imagine the supply chain of the future. So let's just take a minute. I'd like for you to introduce yourself to the people on your table and take 5 minutes and brainstorm as a table, what do you think 2025 looks like? Introduce yourself, and let's just talk amongst ourselves for about 5 minutes. What does 2025 look like? I hope you found out what a great resource the people are in this conference. Because I don't know of another conference that I go to that has the level of thought leadership that is in this room. And it is my goal that through networking, through activities, through speakers, that we can build a guiding coalition to help the average Joe. If we think about today's economy and we think about manufacturing, 9 out of 10 companies are stuck. They're unable to really drive improvement at the intersection of operating margin, inventory turns, and customer service. And they're asked by leadership to make that happen, but they don't know what to do. And so it's our goal to help you to think differently, to unstick the supply chain. We've built supply chains that are inside out, that don't sense, that don't respond. We've made transactions very efficient, but our markets are changing, and we can't adapt at the speed that the markets want us to change. And so many people will come to a stage like this and say, we have supply chain best practices. But I say, wait, I don't believe we do. I think we have emerging practices, and it's up to us to really craft what we need to do. Now, in the 1990s, I built software. And I worked with teams, and we were in the race for really putting new forms of technology and driving improvement at the intersection of operating margin and inventory turns. And I went to many of your companies, and I talked about if you would buy and implement my technology, you would make improvements like this on operating margin and inventory turns. And I believed it. And I didn't intentionally lie to companies, but it's not possible. The potential of today's technology does not allow us to reach the stream. And I'm going to tell you my insights and what I think is possible. So let's reflect back. One of the things that we're doing is research, looking at corporate balance sheets, looking at processes, and really thinking about our progress. We've spent 1.7% of revenue on technology. We have a lot of energy around supply chains as growth slows. But let's just take a minute. Every industry has very unique rhythms and cycles. It's fool's play to believe we can put all companies in a spreadsheet and shake it up and declare a winner, right? It's fool's play. You can't compare Dow Chemical to Walmart. You must compare industry to industry. And as you look at this chart, I really want you to get 5 insights. Growth has slowed. Supply chain matters more than ever. We've improved cash to cash. It's ironic that we can move money faster in today's world than ever before. But we have shortened cash-to-cash cycles primarily by pushing cost and waste back on the suppliers. And as we've done that, we have a very fragile supply base. So while we think about cash-to-cash and we celebrate that we've made that number small, look at the inventory number. We have not made the progress in inventory that many of us believe. And look at the revenue per employee. We've not really translated that into operating margin. And when you look at all of these metrics together, we must manage a complex system. It's a balancing act. Now, this concept of a complex system is one I've been writing about for the last 4 years. And what I've learned is that this complex system has non-linear relationships. I've been working with Arizona State University to look at the patterns and the metrics. And I think a lot about the fact that we have tried to apply linear optimization techniques to a nonlinear problem. And I'm going to tell you about my journey and these insights. So I started with orbit charts, right? You know, the first time I got an orbit chart, I actually hired an intern who showed me this technique. And when I first looked at his orbit charts, I went, wow, that looks like a Chagall painting. I really love modern art, but, you know, is this supply chain, right? But when we look at supply chain leadership, we've really got to look at year-over-year progress at the intersection of metrics. We can't just see the patterns in spreadsheets. This is Nike. Nike is the leader in apparel. Now, if you would look at this chart and you would look at the evolution of Nike over time, you can see that in 2014, they aren't much different than they were in 2006. This is the case of most companies. You'll also see that they aren't making it up my magic era that I promised when I built technology. And this is the case of the companies we study. Now, you just can't look at Nike in isolation. You've got to look at Nike in reference to the peer group, right? And this is Nike versus one of their peer comparators, Adidas, right? And so when you look at this, you can see that Nike has higher performance and they've actually made more improvement. And our study on the supply chains to admire is which companies have driven higher levels of improvement and performance versus their peer group. So to do the supply chains to admire, we take industries by NAICS codes, we group the industries, we look at comparative peer group, and then we begin to look at how have these companies worked on achieving growth, operating margin, inventory turns, return on invested capital, revenue per employee, and then we assign a weighting on the supply chain index, which is a measurement of improvement. Now, when I first started measuring improvement, I had to really stop and think. I don't know if you ever watched the show The Biggest Loser, right? You know, do you notice how that, you know, the people when they first start the show lose weight much faster, right? It's easier to lose weight when you have a lot more to lose. And so you'll often find that the supply chain leaders are outperforming across the balanced portfolio, and they'll be mid-range in the index, which is a measurement of improvement. So in the supply chains to admire analysis, we're looking at performance, and we're also looking at improvement. And today we published our second report on the supply chains to admire, and we're going today celebrate the winners. But before we start, we ask you coming to the conference to tell us which metrics you thought mattered. And when we look at it, you can see that for many, it's all about cost, right? It's about operating margin, or it's about EBITDA. Look how many people value inventory. But if I tell you that the correlation to market capitalization is the highest when you manage the balanced portfolio, and if you'd like to see those formulas by industry, I'll share them. It really requires movement on operating margin, inventory turns, return on invested capital, and growth to power market capitalization. So we've got to think broader. It can't just be about cost. It's got to be about performance, and it's got to be about improvement. And that's harder to do than it is to say. So to judge improvement, we built the supply chain index. And the supply chain index takes the orbit chart and looks at the vector between growth and return on invested capital. So are we making improvement on growth and return on invested capital? Looks at the vector of inventory turns and operating margin. Are we making improvement at that intersection? And then looks at the tightness of the pattern. And I'm going to show you some patterns today that are gnarly and ugly. But supply chain leaders make progress in small incremental changes over time. So please join me in congratulating the supply chains to admire for 2015. These companies in their peer group drove both improvement and performance higher than their peer group for the period of 2006 to 2014, which allowed them to weather the change. And as you look at the list, you'll probably think about people that run those supply chains. I am convinced it takes both strong leadership and a guiding coalition from folks like you. It also takes new business models. If you look at the retail winners, that's all about new business models. You know, we didn't have Whole Foods 15 years ago. Or if we think about the dollar stores and the evolution of that model, or what's happening to drug, right? Those are about new business models. Now, on the right-hand side, or left-hand, depending on where you are, you can see the discrete winners. And when you look at the discrete winners, I want you to think about how tough it was to manage discrete supply chains during the last decade. Price margin erosion, short life cycles, global economies. Those discrete industries do better at planning. They do better at the use of analytics. They take supply chain more seriously than the process industries. Today, we will have 3 people from 3 companies share their stories, because I want you to hear it from them. I want you to hear it from their hearts. So we have 40% of the 2015 winners that have won in 2 consecutive years. So today, General Mills will tell the story. Andrea will talk about the culture and DNA of General Mills. And then I'm excited to have Eastman Chemical come and talk about the management of the chemical supply chain and celebrate the win for them for 2 years in a row. And then we're going to have Intel talk about talent and the building of the culture for the semiconductor industry. And we're going to have 3 very different industries talk about their journey. That's after lunch. So in our table discussions, we'll be able to have a real good discussion about how it matters and what it looks like. You know, and as you talk amongst yourself and hear the leaders, one of my key insights from the research is we fought hard for a seat at the table of supply chain. But as we did that, we made it too functional. And the more functional it is, the slower the progress on the metrics that matter and the orbit charts. So the average company has had a supply chain for about 15 years, or an organization. About a third have source, make, and deliver reporting to the same leader. If they have source, make, deliver reporting to the same organization, they have a higher probability of making progress and improving. We have this thing called the Supply Chain Center of Excellence, which should help us to drive excellence. But most people aren't clear on what excellence is, and they're not clear on which metrics matter. They measure too many things, and they don't really look at a portfolio. And they don't have organizational consistency about what is excellence. And that is really where we have to ground ourselves like a lightning rod to make the journey. And interestingly, 1 out of 2 supply chain centers of excellence do not rate themselves as being successful in their journey. And a lot of that comes down to what is excellence. So as we celebrate with the metrics and the supply chains to admire, we're going to reflect on the things that matter. The characteristics I see is these companies had continuity of leadership. Someone who had the charter. They focused on talent. You know, baby boomers are retiring. We're now into our 3rd generation of supply chain pioneers. But talent is a shortage, particularly in emerging economies. They're focusing on multi-year strategies. Supply chain progress happens year over year in small increments. There's clear governance between what happens corporately, what happens regionally, and the role of the business. The global multinational is very complex. There's strength in horizontal processes. S&OP, revenue management, supplier development, corporate social responsibility, integration with new product launch. It's about horizontal cross-functional alignment. And they're good at planning and analytics. They don't let the urgent get in front of the important. So as you hear from the three winners, I want you to keep those factors in mind and think back and ask them questions, because this is your time to learn from each other. Because I want you to get unstuck. I want you to make the digital pivot. I want you to embrace new ways of working. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about on the way is big data. And I don't really think we have a big data volume opportunity. I think it's a big data variety opportunity. Last night in the digital showcase, we talked about what do architectures look like for streaming data and Internet of Things. I think we'll redefine digital manufacturing, so we'll greatly improve uptime. I think we're going to embrace unstructured data. And one of the things that we see in the polls is a real lack of understanding of sentiment analysis and customer sentiment, and how do we bring that into supply chain? How do we listen? And how do we trace our products, particularly to protect IP from China and emerging economies, so we can be sure we protect our brands? To me, this is what supply chain is about, and it's about evolution of new processes. So we ask you what you were excited about in 2020. You know, it was about big data and demand sensing and visibility, and we're going to talk a lot about that. We're also going to talk about how do we change the molecules and the cultural DNA for robotics and 3D printing and unstructured data, and really embrace digital manufacturing. Because we have to look back and learn from the supply chain stood mire. We have to think about the digital pivot. But I think we also have to think about where we're going. So as I look forward to 2025, these are 5 things I believe supply chains will be able to do. I think rules-based ontologies and cognitive learning will allow us to have supply chains that think as we sleep, that will no longer just see alerts like we do today, but we'll see supply chains think, sense, and act. We're not that far away. I think we will have B2B automation, and we'll see a network of networks. I'm pushing folks like GT Nexus and Alemica and the old Ariba, that's now part of SAP, to really come together and form an interoperability standard so we can have interoperability in business networks, a network of networks. I think that we're going to see manless vehicles redefine transportation. I'm excited about that. I want to encourage you to think about what would it look like if we can move freight anytime during the day and not have the labor issues. I think outside-in processes become the norm. In fact, I'm so passionate about outside-in processes and reducing demand latency that I build a game. And tomorrow afternoon, we'll play the game. And you'll be randomly assigned to either an inside-out or an outside-in process. And if you're inside out, you're going to have demand latency of 45 days. So you will not see the actual demand for 45 days in the channel. And you'll go through traditional MRP and DRP processes, but you'll be blind to the channel. But if you're outside in, you're seeing channel data as it happens with the shopper. And we're going to see what is the return on investment of outside in processes. When you leave here, I want you to be very grounded in demand-driven concepts and outside-in processes and sensing. Now, I think 15% of companies make the digital pivot. I think they embrace the digitization, the transferability, the speed of business, looking at variety of data, and they ask themselves, what could their supply chains be? Not what they are today. And I want you to do that win. So let's get on with the show.